In this video I will try to answer a question that I got on one of my oldest videos, a video called "What is consciousness?" And usually I just reply to people's comments, but I figured that since this was such an old video, it might be worth revisiting again. So the comment is, could you please provide some clarifications on your idea of consciousness? It could be because of subtitles, but I'm having a hard time following your theory, quanta, analogy and stuff. Would the following be correct summation of the theory presented in the vid? Okay, so before I decided to answer this question, I reread the script for the video to remember what I said. Because often I don't feel like rewatching videos, but since this was in my early videos and in most of my videos, I write a script beforehand, and that made it easier to make subtitles. And also it is very convenient for when you get questions on one of these older videos. I can just check the script instead of having to rewatch the video. So anyway, I mean, yeah, most of what I talk about I thought was pretty straightforward. So he's trying to summarize what I said here. We are conscious and are interacting with the world. From our experience, we can conclude that both consciousness, internal/mental world, and material world are part of existence. Both verifiably from subjective point exists. Existence must have fundamental substrate particles from which it is formed. Since material existence can be broken down into its components, and smallest ones we know of today are quanta, you say that mental existence could be made of quanta also, albeit of different speed vibration. Yeah, I suppose, I mean, that's part of what I said in the video, although presented in a less compelling way, I would say. Hopefully I didn't butcher your theory too much. I'm not sure I would call it a theory, but I guess it can be called that. I think of it more as a philosophical hypothesis. That's how I processed the presented info, but I don't understand why you conclude that mental existence is also made of quanta. Okay, so in the beginning, this video is a bit outdated, but in the beginning I often talked about consciousness as perhaps consisting of dark quanta, like I needed some kind of name for it. Since then I have changed it to regions, dark hyperdensity regions, because I guess I had been looking a bit too much at some outdated science books that often talked about, spin of electrons and things like that. Since these fundamental particles more seems to resemble various pressure conditions rather than particles spinning around. But anyway, what he asks here is, could it not be that quanta we see in material world is a different layer of existence? I mean, okay, first of all, we don't actually observe quanta. These particles are studied through abstract mathematics, very complex numbers. So technically we are not really observing them. I think this was something that I didn't clarify very well, and I also used the language of observation, and perhaps he's doing that as well, but I just figured I would clarify that. But yeah, I mean, when I talked about consciousness being similar to quanta, I'm talking about particles that we perhaps have still not measured, something that continues this continuity of things with higher velocity that we have yet to find a way to measure with abstract mathematics. So yeah, there's still no official word for them. But like the point of, let me just continue to read what he says. I wonder if it is easier to read with glasses on, because the sun is like reflecting off the screen, so I think the video quality is going to be kind of bad because like the sun is lighting up from behind. Could it not be that the quanta we see in material world is a different layer of existence. I don't think that goes against non-duality, but then I have nothing to replace substance of consciousness with. So in any case, I'm quite puzzled. I do agree that whatever the fundamental underlying thing is must be the same for both material and mental existence. But saying it is quanta doesn't sit well with me. Yeah, well, like I said, it's not exactly quanta, but it's like, I used the term dark quanta, perhaps not in that particular video, but in my book I did that. Like, basically like the smallest particles we know of, but dark, invisible. So that was like my speculation, or like what seems to be the most logical and philosophically consistent conclusion. But saying it is quanta doesn't sit well with me. You did say just energy as well, so I'd go more with that, I guess. I don't know, hard for me to articulate, but I hope you get what I'm saying. Well, you let me know if I understood what you were saying based on what I replied there. It's a bit hard to read on these mobile devices because the screen goes black very fast if I don't keep pressing the screen. Also, as a side note, the reason I ended up on this vid is that I was writing on the matter of consciousness, but ended up describing what it does, how it functions instead of what it is. What are your thoughts on the following? Consciousness is what it feels like to be in every moment continually. Awareness plus awareness of self-awareness as felt by the ego. Well, I don't know about the ego. I mean, the ego is like the false self. It depends on what you mean by ego here. But yeah, consciousness feels like awareness. I refer to consciousness as that part that simply is aware, that is aware of thoughts, feelings, and other contents of the psyche. The observer / ego / soul. Okay, so it seems like you are correlating observer with ego and soul. I don't think the pure consciousness or observer, or whatever you want to call it, should be lumped together with the ego, because that's not what the ego typically refers to. Sometimes it is the observer or pure consciousness is referred to as the self with a capital S, but never the ego, I don't think. So I think it becomes very confusing when you use ego as an alternative for the observer or soul. But anyway, yeah, the soul can also refer to many things. Sometimes I refer to it as like the psyche in general, and sometimes to the highest part, which indeed is the observer. Is also a action of the brain like any other. Well, I don't know about that because researchers have not been able to find where consciousness is localized in the brain. The brain is still very mysterious, and we don't really quite know how it works. These are like your assumptions, and very often when someone is trying to make an explanation of something or trying to talk about something, when the descriptions of something meet someone else's mind, and that person has a lot of ideas already or impressions of how things are, then that will often result in confusion unless one is really meticulous in going over every possibility of what other people might believe already. And so, yeah, I don't know. I thought it was a pretty good video. I mean, I read the script and I was kind of impressed by my own argument there. But I'm not sure what you are confused by. I am confused by what you exactly are confused by. So you talk about the function of the brain. Yeah, I guess I didn't go into the brain too much in that particular video. A lot of people are very focused on that, and I used to be that too before I realized that it's not enough, because the brain does not explain the origin of life. It does not explain the origin of evolution or what it is. And basically, in order to create a consistent worldview, I couldn't simply rely on this idea that the brain causes consciousness, because that leaves too many holes, too many stuff that are left without explanation, and it's not even a very good explanation to begin with once you start to look into like research of how the brain works and where consciousness is localized and things like that. But I guess maybe I need to be more meticulous. I think I have talked about that more in other videos. There's another video, I don't know if you have found that yet. I think it was from 2019 or something like that, 2018 perhaps. It was a while ago, but it was more recent than this video. Anyway, this is quite a long comment, so amalgamation of all actions of the brain creates the feeling of internal world, which incidentally is also an action of the brain. I guess this is what materialists believe, ? With broader thinking and understanding, we could say that consciousness is part of ever-present existence that is eternal, but it only makes itself observable subjectively in active material structures that are complex enough, aka brains. Yeah, I think that's what I would say or agree with. But in any case, we are still left without the reason for why it feels like to be at all. Similar answer as to why universe exists can be a stand-in, because it can be. Still very unsatisfying and puzzling, but it seems all theory is stuck here. Yes, exactly. Like why does something exist at all is like a very difficult and eternal question in itself. I'd greatly appreciate your input, given that I think you've thought about these things for much longer than I have. I hope most of what I wrote is intelligible. Yeah. Okay. I think that... okay, so... But let me just mention here that since I'm talking, that this idea of talking about consciousness to begin with has to do with this idea that even if I don't really understand something, sometimes I need to touch on certain things in order to make things consistent in an overall philosophy that points in the right direction. So, none of the stuff in my concepts are precisely scientific. They are more like a compass. The stuff that I deal with are like philosophical principles, and I often refer to this as like a wisdom compass. And a compass is something that directs you in the right direction, or more importantly, directs you away from like the wrong path. So it's not the same as like scientific instruments. Perhaps, it is very difficult to talk about certain things that are very detailed in timeless education. It tends to be very general. The main focus should be on the general principles and not the specifics. Then you can use the general principles to arrive at certain conclusions about the specifics of things. So when it comes to consciousness, it's the same thing. I cannot in detail explain what these forces exactly are that makes consciousness possible, or that makes life possible. But it seems to make the most sense, in a general sense, to look at these forces or these phenomena as something that has always coexisted with the material reality that we can observe. So, like the argument I make in the video is that, matter is just as mysterious as consciousness. We focus a lot on not understanding consciousness, but we also don't understand matter, and it becomes problematic if we try to explain something that we don't understand, such as consciousness, with something else we don't quite understand yet, such as matter, because matter is like also quite an extraordinary phenomenon in that it's consisting of like constant motion in these various pressure conditions, or like particles that we assume they are particles, but they're not even particles. They are like light and energy and vibrations and things like that. So it all starts to sound very sort of mystical and spiritual once we start to talk about matter in their fundamental essence. And I don't think that's a coincidence that things start to sound almost magical when we dig deep enough into even material reality. And then we have the mystery of life, how life emerged to begin with. And we can observe when we look at things around us that we don't see life spontaneously arising from ordinary matter, what we call dead matter. We do see dead things being produced by things that are living, and like corpses or like something left behind by something living. And we assume that I guess materialists assume that like the corpse was the main thing and it just temporarily had some accidental product by nature, spark of energy that gave the illusion that something that is now dead was alive for a bit. But that view is not, it's unfounded. It seems to make more sense that the more fundamental thing is life, because life, it's like it starts with life. Life is what makes something begin to grow inside another organism. In this case, like a human mother. I mean, yeah, there are like cells and various cellular components come together, but there's still some kind of energetic spark we don't quite understand, and then that like makes use of these more cellular and material substances that then, and once life is done with these things and it moves on, it just leaves these particles behind for a time. But even these particles are like made of atoms that are constantly moving in a very mysterious way, constantly being a form of energy themselves. So there's like various stages of energies, various stages of pressure conditions. And it's very difficult to find the right words, the right terms, because all of this is very difficult to understand, even by scientists using these mathematical formulas to really talk about these things. And like the evidence they use for why they are correct about certain formulas are that they can predict using such formulas. They can even use them in machines or like to make technology, using them for engineering purposes. And then that is considered proof that these tiny particles exist, because, well, if they don't exist, how else can we use such sophisticated technology using the same mathematics that seems to prove that these things exist? But of course, it could also be that things exist quite differently or a bit differently, and that these formulas, even if they are not correct, they still point to something existing that can be used. So we are like using things without fully knowing what these things are. And I remember, if you read a lot of like spiritual literature from around the time when electricity emerged, people were like concerned that electricity is like spiritual energy, and that this modern invention, that it like interrupted like the harmonious state of nature and like the spiritual dimensions and things like that. And I don't think that's an issue, but because I think that the real spiritual domain, if we are to call it that, is deeper than electricity, so to speak. But certainly there are very powerful forces when we dig deeper into even physical particles. Like, who would guess that a so-called dead physical particle would contain something like nuclear power that could cause enormous destruction. And then one might think what power might exist even deeper. And of course consciousness seems like something quite powerful, like the mind that is capable of invention and things like that. It's not a crude power, but it's more like a sophisticated power. Well, okay, I think sitting out here in the sun with all the noise is not the best way to talk too much about this. But I guess I need very specific questions if I am to answer them correctly. But I hope that this gives you some kind of answer to your questions, any questions that you might have about my views on consciousness. But basically it tends to be very general.